This is Dan Rogers, your host on We the People Town Square, coming to you from the center of the universe, the high plains of Texas, near the headwaters of the Prairie Dog Town Fork of the Red River. Today is December the 28th of 2023, and today we're here with Cindi Bulla, who's running for HD 87 State Representative. Cindi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Dan.
Let's start off by telling the voters why you want to be our state representative.
So the reason I want to be the state representative representing District 87 is because I have been doing the constituent side of representing this district for about 15 years. I have been in and out of Fort Price's office a number of times, and also in and out of the Capitol, working with all of our mostly House members, sometimes our senators, working closely with them to try to get priorities for public policy in the world of my own profession, which is the realtor world and the real estate world. So private property rights, reducing property taxes, all of the business-friendly criteria that Texas is so highly known for throughout the United States. It just seemed like a natural transition. When Ford was in office, I was so pleased with his representation and how laser-focused he was on the district. I always felt like I could do the most good as a constituent for him. But when he announced his retirement, I felt like it was a very natural transition into the other side of that. I understand service, have been in the service part of my real estate career for a long time as an elected leader for them.
So what issues are you most passionate about?
So the one I've worked the most on and am probably the most well-known on is property tax relief. We still have a long road. You know, we've been on, Dan, I know you've been involved in this. We've been on a multi-decade search for the solution to reducing property taxes and keeping them there. And of course, our 2023 session made a huge inroad, a historic inroad to getting that property tax relief into the pockets of Texans. What I fear, though, is that because there's still one area of property taxes that we have not focused on, that if we don't get really laser focused on that, we're going to see those savings that we've achieved this tax year be eroded again, and that's expenses. We have looked at revenues and revenue triggers, which sort of made our taxpayers partners in that tax process. We've looked at trying to limit appraisals. We've looked at trying to limit tax rates. But what we haven't looked at is, and trained our constituents to look at, are the budgets of these taxing entities. And so that's where their money really gets spent. I hope in the next session to work with my fellow legislators to find a path to a little bit more transparency on the expense side. When I was early in my advocacy career, I took a course here in Amarillo called Amarillo 101. And in that, Dan, they showed me an infographic of the municipal budget for Amarillo, Texas. And it was there that they took this giant, almost 1,000-page budget and narrowed it down into a bite-sized infographic that allowed me to look year over year and see what categories the expenses were increasing or decreasing it in. And it allowed me to ask good questions. And I feel like that's one more step in the process of not just getting taxpayer relief for 1 year, but keeping that relief in sight for all of our local taxing districts. Should be an easy mandate. It doesn't cost a lot extra, and I think it's kind of the starting point for a lot of the local budget conversations anyway.
Do we need property taxes?
So I've looked at a number of different models through my realtor service about what would have to happen in order to eliminate property taxes. And I'm not sure that I've seen one yet. I'm open to it, but I haven't seen one yet that seems like a good replacement for property taxes. I looked at one model, and this has been a few years back, but I looked at one model that showed that a sales tax increase to somewhere between 18 and 22% might replace the revenues that were being generated by property taxes. But I look at that and I see how much of our state borders other states, and I worry that even those projections might be low because most of us in Texas, except for those who live right in the heart of Texas, live close enough to a border to maybe cross over, and so there could be some unintended consequences. Obviously, that's a conversation we all want to have. It'd be great. As a realtor, as a property owner myself, I'd love to not have to pay property taxes, but somehow we have to fund the government, and I'm not sure that I've seen a model that works otherwise.
Well, to me, all you have to do is eliminate property taxes and apply sales tax to real estate transactions. You're done. Texas would boom for a century. Property values would go way up. And they'd bring in probably as much or more revenue. You don't have to change anything. Just when you buy a car or a truck or a piece of equipment, you pay sales tax. Why not real estate? And then you own it.
So any tax on real estate is going to have an impact on the market, and I'm not sure I'm following how you think that would increase the market. So what we have to look at...
Because it would eliminate that expense. That's why property values in California are higher than Texas, because they did Proposition 13 back in the 80s. And property taxes are very low in California. That's why their values are higher. Taxes are an expense. And rents would drop, values would go up, it would help the poor. And if you choose to buy a property, you should pay the sales tax on it. And you never have to pay another tax on that property as long as you live. But now we have to pay sales tax, and as we buy property, we renovate it, we have to improve it, we have to maintain it, and we have to pay sales tax on everything that we buy to do that, on top of the property taxes, which is assessed by a bureaucrat. It's not a real value. It's just somebody's opinion, and every value is wrong. Every value at the appraisal district is wrong. So some are too high, some are too low. So that means that our government has a tax system foisted upon us where they are either subsidizing you or they're stealing from you. Is that a good system?
So any system for taxation, first of all, taxation is our money. It's the government taking our money and redistributing it to provide government services. So you and I are going to agree on that. What I think we do disagree on, and I would say strongly disagree on, is the economic impact of what you're describing. Obviously, everything has to be on the table. As a legislator, we all have to be open to whatever is in the best interest of our constituents. I haven't seen anything in my career or in my public policy studies that would indicate what you're describing would have a positive impact on the overall economy. But part of my job as a legislator is going to be to research and study those things and be open to ideas that maybe I don't
not only that,
agree with.
You would eliminate all the bureaucracy associated with property taxes, which is massive. And that would save the taxpayers a fortune in and of itself, and then those people would actually go into productive work, producing things, rather than being a drag on the rest of the economy. And that would have a profound effect. It's capitalism versus socialism. Property taxes are a form of socialism.
Well, taxes of any kind are what funds. The government has no money without our money.
Yeah, I didn't say we eliminate taxes.
Yeah.
I'm saying you have a consumption tax rather than a production tax. And then when you own your property, you have a stake in society. Now you don't. Nobody owns their property in Texas. We basically lease it from the government. And then they raise the lease at will every year. I just don't think that's a fair system. But the problem you have in the legislature is that you have so many so much vested interest in the property tax system, it's going to be very difficult to change it. So to me, you have to eliminate the system, scrap it, and start over. That's my thought.
So your term, and I hear you there, and I know there are others who agree with you. There would be others who would disagree. So to use your term about leasing your property from the government, because our property taxes are all on some level local, we don't have a state property tax. We are, for example, when I pay my school tax, I'm paying for my school district and the education that's required by our Constitution to provide. When I pay my municipal tax, I'm paying for those municipal services that I enjoy. Could I pay for those individually and separately in a more efficient way? Probably not, but that's one of the reasons I feel like if we're going to continue to tax people, property taxes, and what we need to do is be more laser focused on the budgets. It's all our money. You and I completely agree on that. It is all our money. So we have a right to know how it's being spent, where it's being spent, and certainly to have a say-so in how and where it's being spent. Right now we have our citizens with their eyes focused on their appraisals, and that's not really where the money gets spent. That appraisal in a property tax world determines how much pro rata your portion of the budget is. We put those revenue triggers on, and those were good. That was a good idea, as are the homestead exemptions. But none of that focuses our constituent eyes on how the money is being spent and where, so that when they go to those trigger elections or those bond elections and they vote on what they're willing to add or to their property taxes, they do so with eyes wide open about where the other money is being spent and where they might be able to achieve some efficiencies and keep their own property taxes low. That's one thing that I think we could probably both agree that is good about property taxes, and that is at least the property owners themselves, at least the people, are able to vote on them as they happen.
Well, it's an illusion because they get to vote up or down on the bond issue, but then the county commissioners can lean on the appraisal district to push values. Mm-hmm. And it's a system that's not transparent. And that's what I have a problem with.
And certainly that's not supposed to happen. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it never does happen, but there are measures in place to prevent that from happening. Those appraisals by law are supposed to be accurate.
But they can't be because it's a mass appraisal. Every property is unique, just like individuals, and they're all different. So to me, I mean, you talked about the homestead exemption, which the reason they're doing that, I believe, is because they believe that most voters are more likely to own a home. So they're buying votes, but what that does, when you reduce it on a homeowner, what about all the people who live in tenant-occupied properties that haven't got to the point where they can afford to buy a home? Then that pushes up their rent costs because all that has to be passed through down to the lowest person, the least able to afford it. And that's what I think is wrong about our tax system. To me, it's the most regressive tax there is. It's just, to me, you shouldn't have property taxes. That's my opinion, and there's a simple way to do it, and I've talked to them about it for years, but I see the legislators, many of them have interests in firms that represent people at appraisal districts to get taxes lowered and that sort of thing. So there's all kinds of interests to keep the system going. So they're not necessarily concerned about the citizens. They're concerned about themselves.
So I would just respond, again, I respect that, and I've heard those arguments before, but I would just respond by saying that Texas is doing something very right. It has, depending on who you're talking to, it has anywhere from the 7th to the 10th largest economy in the world, and has survived the last very tumultuous 5 years and come out really strong. So it would be, as a legislator, it would be a hard sell for me to say, let's upend everything. Obviously, property taxes are a problem. But I think if we get local budgets reined in and get our constituents focused on those local budgets, we can keep those property taxes low and manageable and still maintain some of the other advantages that we have economically in the country.
So is Texas doing things right, or is all these other states doing things wrong?
Well, it could be a little bit of both, but I'm a very proud Texan, and in my capacity with the National Association of Realtors, I've been one of their regional vice presidents and on their board for a long time. Also served as chair of their Issues Mobilization grant program in 2021, and I'm just telling you, I think we're doing a lot of things right. As I traveled around the country and worked on trying to mitigate or stop or reverse some of the incredibly misguided local and state legislation that was passed involving private property throughout the country, I was ready to kiss the ground every time I came home from one of those other states.
Well, we better enjoy it while it lasts, because I think there's a lot of people that want to work to turn us into those other states.
Well, I think that's true, and I do think we have to guard against that. The thing that made us who and what we are were our traditional conservative values, our focus on having government do only what government has permission to do, no more, and to hang in there as far as keeping government at bay, keeping it as local as possible, and keeping the power in the hands of the people where it was designed to be. Well, Texas does do a pretty good job of that. By comparison, we do need to protect it at all costs.
So you want to be the state representative. What is the duty? What is the qualifications to be a state representative?
I think qualification-wise, you absolutely have to have the chops and the knowledge and the contacts and the wherewithal to be among the best, if not the best, communicator in your district. There is no way that you or I, or even for Price, who I've traveled all over this district and I haven't heard a cross word about, so I think we could probably all agree that he's been an excellent representative. Not even he knows everything. What he did well, what I feel like I can do well, and what I feel like any state representative must do well is create teams, create groups of constituents who are experts in their field, and make sure that they're on speed dial, to use kind of an old term, but to make sure that they're at the ready at any moment to help watch. One of the things Forrest shared with me early on is that he and his staff spend far more time blocking bad legislation than creating and carrying good legislation. And so no one person can do that. No one person can know all the things they need to know, especially about a district as incredibly diverse economically as we are. It would be necessary to know all things. There's at least there's dozens of different agricultural interests in this district, not counting the economic interest and the industry interest and the individual interest. So you've got to have groups of people assembled to whom you can go at a moment's notice and say, you're on the ground, you're living this truth. So this bill says this. What does that mean to you? What will happen 2 years from now? One of the wisest business advisors I ever had told me that a good entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, thinks about what's going to happen tomorrow, but a really successful entrepreneur thinks about what's going to happen the day after tomorrow. And I think that's absolutely true of legislation. Water is gets brought up all the time and is probably our most area existential threat. And those are long-term solutions that have to be researched. You have to build the partnerships that you're going to need to find and execute on those solutions as we conclude, as we decide as a group of constituents what those are.
So you mentioned water.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a water problem?
I think we will if we're not careful. Here's what I do think, and this is important. There is nobody in this state or in this country who is more laser focused on preservation of our natural resources than those of us who live right on top of them. We will be the first people that will be impacted if we don't carefully care for them. And I think that's happening in our district. As I've visited with our farmers and ranchers, I've visited with our dairy people, I've visited with some of the people with some of our water districts. I am hearing plenty of focus on preserving the Ogallala resource for as long as we can. But I'm also hearing that we as legislators and we throughout Texas, this is not just our problem in the Panhandle, but throughout Texas, we have to start thinking about the long-range solutions for when those aquifers that serve us so well begin to deplete. And in some parts of our area, that will happen much sooner rather than later. In visiting with FOR, the legislature addressed some of the problem. I don't think probably enough, but FOR tells me that there are municipal water systems in our area and outside our area, both large and small, who are losing as much as 57 to 60% of their fresh water supply to poor infrastructure. So obviously this legislative session, we tried to address some of that by making money available for municipals to tap into at lower interest rates or no interest to be able to repair old pipes. But I think there's probably a lot more municipals in line for that money than there is money to go around. So there may have to be a little bit more than that. That's the short term. Let's preserve. Let's worry about leaks and
yeah, I think
such,
what you're saying there is they're losing 50 to 60% of what they produce to their customers and leaks.
Yes,
but that
and
doesn't
leaky
mean
pipes.
they're running out of water.
Yeah. Well, no, it doesn't. Although I have been told on multiple occasions by people who purport to know that we could be within 10 years of having some of those systems so low that they can't service as promised. Now, with the right strategies in place, and like I said, those locals know what those strategies have to be. They work on them. They know them better than you or I could know. They're sitting right on top of that resource, and they know exactly what they're dealing with. But we have to make sure that those resources are available, and that's to keep, our small towns are the lifeblood of our state, and we've got a lot of them in our district. So we've got to keep them vibrant. We've got to keep them up and working. The rest of this state depends very heavily on those people who live in those small towns to get up every morning before the sun rises and get out and produce the food, fuel, and fiber that the rest of the state depends on year-round.
Are you familiar with the hydrologic cycle?
No, tell me about it.
Well, the hydrologic cycle is how water is, and a lot of people believe the earth is still creating water. It comes to the surface, it's evaporated, goes back into the atmosphere, and it comes down in snow or rain or some other solid form, and it goes back into the soil, and within 100 years, it's back in our aquifer, and it's just a continued cycle. So how can we run out of water? You can't destroy water.
So I have visited with a couple of professors at WT and an engineer with Excel, and those individuals have assured me that it can happen, that if the aquifer is replenishing, and at least one of them told me that they didn't think it really was, but if the aquifer is replenishing, it is replenishing much, much slower than it is being used, and that there will be a window of time between when the aquifer is inadequate to serve. Think about our ag uses. There are extensive uses of water. The conversations with these individuals were more related to long-term energy resources, all of which require abundance of water. But yeah, so when we look at these things, we have to say if there is a window of time, there has to be a plan for that window of time. And you may indeed be right, and at least one of those would have agreed with you that the aquifer is replenishing, although at a slower rate than what it's being used. Now, I hope you are right. I hope we don't have a water problem. But what you must do, whether you're in business or in government, is plan for the worst and hope for the best. So we do need to make sure that we have a plan for any window of time between the time that the aquifer doesn't sustain us and all of our myriad of ag uses as well as it did, and the time when we have another alternative, whether that be some sort of replenishment of the aquifer or another opportunity. I know desalinization is a big conversation, and I know from talking to FOR that we do have an abundance of briny water in this area, and there may be a day when that becomes a realistic alternative. I don't think that's anytime soon, but because of the cost and the technology gap right now, but it could be at some point. And all of those conversations need to be had decades before they're necessary.
Well, we need a little more global warming because that's what produces rainfall, which produces more water. So do you buy into the global warming?
So I think that the short answer to that is no. I think it's realistic to think the climate is changing. I feel the climate changing a little bit. I know as a child, where I live right now was Tornado Alley, and I spent a lot of summers running back and forth to tornado shelters, and that seems to have kind of moved east. So I'm sure the climate is changing. What I haven't bought into, to use your phrase, is that we have that much control over it. Obviously, we need to take care of our resources. We need to take care of where we live and what we do, and we need to preserve everything we can. But we absolutely do not need to be crippling ourselves economically by abandoning energy sources and resources that we count on as a nation in order to play into some sort of narrative that the end is imminent.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago Chicago was covered in glaciers. And I'm kind of glad they melted myself. Yeah, climate always changes. I think it's about control. And I'm not so sure some of these other issues, like claiming we're all going to run out of water and we're all going to run out of fuel and oil. It's just to scare people, control us, and to regulate us, and to centralize things with regulations. And
you are 100% right, Dan. There is no need for any of us to be running around in fear. We can't run our businesses like that, and we cannot run our governments like that. Economies are destroyed by that kind of thinking. But we can plan. And I think planning is important. We don't have to abandon anything. We can just plan.
Yeah, I just would rather see, I think individuals would come up with solutions if they're needed. Government won't.
Well, that's absolutely the truth. The only time government is really good is when the people are running it. And I think we got to work on that. I think we're having some trouble with that. Our people are worn out with politics, and they're worn out with government, and I understand why. But hopefully people like you and I can change that attitude. It is our government.
So why do you think people are worn out with government?
Well, look at us. Sometimes we're fussing among one another. We're fussing, we don't look so good from the outside. Those folks that got tired and washed their hands and walked away. And my message to them is, we don't have that luxury. We built the most powerful nation on the planet, and we built the most powerful state within that nation on the planet. We have to run it. It's not going to run itself. And if we leave it to others to run, then we may not like the outcome. So people like you and I and your listeners, Dan, we've got to get back in charge of it. And we don't have to do that by fussing with one another. You and I have disagreed on a number of things tonight, but doesn't mean we don't like one another, and it doesn't mean we can't work together on the things we do agree. It also doesn't mean that you won't convince me or I won't convince you. All we have to do is keep talking, keep our voices down, and go at it one issue and one problem at a time, the same way you and I go at our real estate deals. We just overcome the hurdles one at a time.
Speaking of real estate deals, can you tell me about your most difficult real estate transaction and how you resolved it?
Oh, I wanted you to ask me about my favorite one, not the most difficult one.
You can tell me about that one next.
So probably my most difficult real estate deal was I was super young and I was in a job that I really wasn't qualified for. When I first moved back to Amarillo, I took a job doing real estate asset workouts for a local financial institution that was involved in multiple large commercial projects. We called them ADC projects, acquisition, development, construction projects, all over the United States. And because of the trouble that financial institution and others like it were in, nobody wanted to have that job. And so enter Cindi Bulla, the 20-something-year-old person who didn't really know anything, but they needed somebody to take the lead on some of these. I was afforded the opportunity to manage some properties and work out and sell and dispose of some properties that I would otherwise never have been able to be a part of. And one of those gigantic properties was in the north side of San Antonio called Encino Park. Many of us know that area now, but at the time, I was in charge of that project. I was dealing with some utilities, municipal utility districts that had bonds that were not even U.S. funded bonds, and I barely knew what a bond was. So I had more than once on that project gotten myself a little overloaded in my promises. I did manage to deliver and make a pretty good name for myself in the real estate world, and that's frankly how I ended up in the real estate world.
Well, that's interesting. It was all vacant back then.
Yes,
probably.
Yes, yeah.
In Austin, I saw mall strip centers vacant for 10 years.
Oh, yeah. I-20, the whole I-20 corridor, everything south of Fort Worth, Arlington, and Dallas was overextended and it had been overfunded by the lenders because they thought projects were complete that weren't and had advanced money on them, and all of that workout was a mess.
That was the government that created that problem.
Well, I would agree with you there. I would agree with you there.
The United States Congress that did it. Mm-hmm. They should have held those people accountable for the damages they did to all those people that lost billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. That's true, and I think they did hold some of them accountable. But I
don't think anybody.
I have a different, and I do think government caused it. But government has a tendency to overreact sometimes. I'm sure that comes as a shock to you, but in those days, I think there were some accounting changes, some mark-to-market accounting changes that were imposed. And
they changed the depreciation, and they changed so 30% of the return was wiped out overnight.
Mm-hmm. And when you have government put its thumb on this scale, and then it just pulls the thumb off really fast, sometimes you have bad consequences.
They were encouraging these savings and loans to lend on real estate, and they were giving them all kinds of incentives, and then they pulled the rug out from under them.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened. And we have to guard against that. Dan, that's another thing that makes me qualified for this position. I've seen a couple of times history repeat itself, and I've watched the knee-jerk reactions sometimes that would be better. We would all be better served if government would just take a more methodical approach to things and maybe even stay out of it every once in a while.
It's just appalling what's going on out there. People don't know, and there's something else I don't think very many people know about that could just destroy the nation. But apparently, Obama put in some deal in 2012, where the SEC is going to be able to see every brokerage house, every individual's stock trades in real time. And they're going to scarf up all that information on every individual, your Social Security number, everything. And if people find out about that, it's going to collapse the stock market. Nobody's going to invest.
Yeah, I have not heard anything to that effect, but that needs to be stopped. So
I think there's some federal lawsuits being filed, but it's going to be a huge concern. I mean, and it's worldwide. Mm-hmm. So it's just government trying to take control of everything.
Yeah. So there's a fine line, although I don't know that it's as fine as some think, but there's a line between transparency and consumer protections and just getting into other people's business. And government tends to do the latter way too often. And that's true of every level of government. We have to watch that on every level. It's why we, the citizens, have to get more involved.
Well, we have to reverse it. And the problem is, I think, is that people are losing confidence in their government because they're losing confidence in their elected officials because they've lost confidence in the vote. They don't trust it. So I'm big about getting us back to.
And you and I can brag a little. You and I can brag a little because I don't think that's true of our local folks. I have worked with these folks for a long time, and I do think they're laser focused on keeping government as small as possible. And we have a decent enough constituency around here that if one of them's doing it wrong, they'll know. They'll know right away because we're an involved citizenry. We were kind of raised that way, Dan. That's a value system that I think some areas are getting away from, and some of our young students are losing the connection to their part, their responsibility in keeping this amazing country and this amazing state on track. But we live in an area where those values are still a high priority. And we need to keep them that way. And that's part of what I think I bring to this seat.
All right. Was there anything else you'd like to tell the voters and maybe why they should choose you over any of your opponents?
So the number one reason, Dan, is because I do have this experience. I have been in these conversations at a very high level. So that's the number one reason. The other reason is I have a proven track record of leadership and very extensive leadership. I was the chairman of the board over 160-some thousand Texas realtors, and I think you would be hard-pressed to find one of them who won't tell you that I never forgot that I was a service person. I served them. I worked for them. They did not work for me. I worked for them. I answered to them. And I feel exactly the same way about our elected officials. They work for us. And I am proud to have been a constituent of some of the ones that I have worked with because I don't think any of them ever forgot that. And I will continue that tradition. It is a tradition of service. The elected officials work for the people, not the other way around. I will never forget that.
Yeah, we want to elect people that want to represent us, not rule us.
100%. See, we agree on a lot.
All right. Well, how do people learn more about you?
They need to go to cindyfortexas.com. I also have all of the social media channels also titled Cindi for Texas. So at Cindi for Texas on X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it, and Cindi for Texas on Instagram. So I hope they'll go there and kind of look and see what I'm all about. I'm also available for larger, small groups, anytime, anywhere. My job is to outwork all three of the other opponents, and I have every intention of doing that. So I am at your service from this moment forward.
Well, very good. Well, I want to commend you for having the courage to step out and run for public office, and that takes a lot of courage to put your neck out there.
Indeed, yes.
And so that's commendable, and we want to thank you for coming by.
It's my pleasure, Dan, and thanks for providing this service for our voters.
No worries.